Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I will show you our development of the human aerosol test platform, HUMIMIC-InHALES, that we do together with tissues for the evaluation of respiratory toxicity and systemic effects of inhaled aerosols. So I will talk about the challenges that we face with aerosols, how we want to model them in vitro, and show you the approach we use for that, and then the combination with the tissue system. Aerosol is a suspension of liquids and or solid particles in a carrier gas, and they can range in various particle sizes from around 1 nanometer to 1 millimeter. The properties might be altered by order of magnitudes depending on different conditions like temperature, time, distribution. And you can see here some examples from welding fumes that are very small, almost gas-like, up to pollens, for example, or mineral dust. And these particles have different shapes and structures. There are liquid spheres up to rigid pointy needles, like sprays or liquid particles. Then you have things like clouds that are around solid nuclei, or even complex stuff like pollen that are just solid particles, or even needles or fibers. And if you take the anatomical complexity into consideration, it's not just these particles enter from the top and go to the bottom of your lungs. There are a lot of things influencing how these particles end up where they end up. That's dependent on flow speed, on surface of resistance. And you can see here these blue and red bars showing sort of the distribution of this these properties within the lungs. And this results then in particle fractions that are supplied in blue and green that are actually deposited. And you see that the deeper you go down, the less big size particles you have that are absorbed or entered. So it really depends on where you get your aerosol. It's not straight line from top to bottom, you just get less there. It really depends, it's like a filtering system, and depends a lot on the anatomy. So if there's really no easy strategy to work with aerosols in vitro, because you cannot just store the aerosol and then put it on your cell cultures. They need to be generated or usually freshly as part of the experiment, and you have to bring them to the cell culture. So you have to be very careful because the aerosols change rapidly, and they usually, if you do it not correctly, they leave you with a biological response that's of limited relevance, and you end up with an assumption and not really what happens in the lung. There are various in vitro aerosol exposure systems. You saw a few before, injection systems, but there is also continuous flow system where you just deposit the aerosol on your cell culture. But there are limitations because this is the target doses are ambiguous depending on what cell culture you use. The parameters cannot be modified independently, and the in vitro dose is not a straight line from in vivo. So there are a lot of things that are unclear and not really easy to just translate into an in vitro system. So our approach is the InHALES system. I can also give you more details a bit later if you come to me in person. And essentially it's a system that drives the objective to simulate aerosol generation and uptake like in humans, that have simulate physiological volumes of the human head respiratory tract, that simulates the physiological effect of velocities, flow directions and flow patterns, and the physiological environment in the human respiratory tract, so that you have in vivo surface properties and surface volume ratios that simulate the human airway tract. And essentially, that's what we generated. It's the independent holistic air liquid exposure system called InHALES. So it's an apparatus that's able to breathe surrounding air and operating, for example, medical inhalers. And it's a real life aerosol generation and sampling without the need of accessory equipment, and functionally simulating the complex human respiratory tract. I have a short movie. Can you quickly start that in the back? I think you have to press on it. Which describes a bit what we want to do or what the concept is.
The human respiratory tract is of stunning complexity. And airborne materials entering it show dynamic patterns of deposition on the airway walls. Wouldn't it be great if we could simulate this outside the human body? For instance, when developing inhalable drugs, we could perform preclinical trials in vitro and study drug efficacy and delivery simultaneously. Amazing cell culture models and multi-organ systems for this purpose are available, but we cannot make full use of their potential, simply because achieving realistic dosing is so difficult. At Philip Morris International R&D, we have developed a new generation in vitro aerosol exposure system, the InHALES, to overcome this limitation. The system is inspired by human respiratory physiology and anatomy and consists of a mouth module, an airway module, and a lung module. Cell cultures can be placed and exposed to test aerosols in each module. But how does it work? Let's, for instance, consider the use of a medical inhaler. The inhaler is mounted at the aerosol inlet of the InHALES and actuated. The aerosol is pulled through the system by the action of the lung module and deposits on the cell cultures. Because the InHALES closely simulates the conditions within the respiratory tract, the aerosol deposition is well aligned with the deposition in the human airways, and so are the biological responses to the exposure. This is the next generation of in vitro aerosol exposure systems, developed by PMI.
Okay, I think you get how it works. Can you go? I can myself go back one. Still, okay. So the first version was really a prototype, essentially in a lab with, you can see here, a lung module, airway models or models built as a proof of concept. We had tracheal module, a bronchial module, and base plate for the lung module. And this was very soon developed into a version 2.0. You see it on the card here. It has the exact same physiological parameters as a human, so that the volumes are the same. And you can see the different modules. And for example, underneath here, you can see, it doesn't work. Yeah, here you can see plugs where you could put in cell models, for example. So it has a nasal module, small airways module. I will not go into the details, but I'm happy to talk with you about that. It has a respiratory airway and alveolar model. So a lot of these modules are wetted, that you have the same surface as in your tracheal tract. We work with sponges and foams in order to get the same kind of surface area that you would have in the alveolar, and work with different materials and test items to optimize it. But we also have, as I just mentioned, these functional plugs to put in cell models and sensor equipment. And we have this is a full modularity system, and controlled exposure conditions are possible within this. So the opportunities we see are great, actually. You can see a lot of aerosol sources that are there, sprays, environmental sources, fires, medical inhalers, inhaled drugs, but also smoke, for example. And these aerosol conditions, evolution, the portion of the inhalers can then be translated to the biology, and we can work with different aerosol dosimetry and evolution tools to expose expose the biology to different patterns of aerosols. And you can see where it can be applied. So now we come to the tissue system that I guess most of you already know. What we envision, or what we're working on together, is to implement this chip into the inhales in order to also add the systemic component to the system. So not only having the lung, but also what happens after deposition to the lung, for example, to the liver, or what happens if you have the uptake and then the metabolism. So we already did a proof of concept with the tissue chips a couple of years ago. Actually, it was published 2020 on combining the lung with the liver. And due to time, I will not go into much details now, but again, happy to talk about that. We showed that the organs, the lung and the liver, are stable over a 14-day period. And we did a proof of concept experiment with aflatoxin B1, where you can see that the liver can rescue the effects of the aflatoxin if they're cultured together, compared to if you only have the lung, then the lung significantly has effects or is dying over time, whereas with the liver it can be rescued. So essentially what we're working on now is to do this, to enter these chips into the inhale system, namely in the trachea module. As you can see here, we built a holder where you can put the chip in, again here. So you can put the chip into this holder. You can see here the trachea module and a membrane that is the lung module. Then you have the reservoir, and here the second compartment, which is then the liver compartment, and the pump in the back. So you have the systemic circulation. We built a new chip for this. It is PDMS-free, and now with a specialized COC in the pump layer, where we have the different modules. So first you can see is the holder. Then there's the membrane, where the PET membrane, where the lung module sits on top. Then the union nut that screws the thing onto the chip, and then a breathable lid in order to operate the system. We built specific cell culture inserts to culture them in standard well plates before we transfer them onto the HUMIMIC-InHALES chip. And you can see here the membrane holder and the PET membrane on top. We also did some absorption measurements with different problematic compounds like testosterone, TNF-alpha, and nicotine, and you can clearly see that the chip, the COC chip, the new chip, is much better than the PDMS chip, because we don't have the problems of absorption of compounds within the system. You will be able to hear more about the chip at the tissues booth, or also at other talks of tissues. I think it's quite a good improvement of the chip. And here you can see our first cell cultures that are compared to transwell cultures. You see here on the first slide the assembled HUMIMIC chip in the holder, and then transferred after extraction of this holder, and then it's assembled on the inhales chip. And the next step is then to have the breathable multi-organ chip in the breathable aerosol exposure chip system, and sort of have everything combined in one. The aerosol exposure, then the systemic effect of the aerosol to the liver. And there are many other multi-organ chip assays available that you can implement instead of the liver, obviously. The limits are, the sky are the limits, or whatever. But anyway, I think we have a lot of options to look at aerosol exposure combined with the systemic component. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and thank this great group of people that work with me on this tissues, and also internally at PMI. Thank you very much.